like the rushing of a mighty wind, like the rushing of a mighty wind.
To answer the question of who should pay,
Yeah.
the federal government should be on the hook for some of that. But every single company that benefited from chattel slavery, all the insurance companies, all the freight companies, all of those companies that existed then, that still exist now in some name, shape, or form, they should have to pay into that because they all profited for it. Just think about this. You insured a slave. When you bought a slave, you got insurance on that slave. That insurance company made money off of that. And they built up into
what percentage of the workforce in the United States do you think were actually slaves here in this country? Because that might.
I don't know what the percentage was, but I know all the hard work. I know who did all the hard work.
No.
I know
you know
who
what?
did, I
You
know
just said
who
the
worked
railroads. You just said the railroads. Why aren't the Chinese immigrants asking for reparations?
Because they've already been gifted what they were going to get.
We did it for them.
You did it full?
No,
the Chinese built the railroads. The Chinese were slaves. They built the railroads.
We did that for them.
No. The Chinese were the majority of the slaves building railroads.
Now, on
They
the
didn't get
railroad,
reparations. They don't want it.
Well, I'll tell you what. Next time we'll have you a Chinese dude in here so you can ask him that. I don't give a I'm talking about black people.
Can you guys deal with the
I'm talking
straight
about
hair?
black people.
Yeah, actually, yeah. That's another misconception that we get all the time, too.
We can cut any kind of hair. But we're talking about what black people. Hold on. We're talking about where the money's supposed to come from. It's companies that are trillion-dollar, billion-dollar companies that started in the 1600s, 1700s, that are still around, and they benefited and profited immensely from that.
What if it's a
They
company
should
that
have
never
to
had
pay
slaves?
that.
Should they pay reparations?
No, not that the company had slaves, but we had companies that insured slaves. You had companies that transported slaves.
Well, what if it's a company that did none of it? Should they pay?
No, if they didn't have anything to do with chattel slavery, no, they
Right.
shouldn't.
Neither
but
did
the
I.
companies that should.
But let me say this.
But your grandfather,
But you understand the point?
But if your grandfather was here in the United States, I don't know. You said you from Canada. I don't know. We're not worried about it. We're worried about the people.
What if
that
your
were here.
grandfather was a slave owner and mine wasn't?
My grandfather was.
What if he was? But my point is, what if he was? Because
My grandfather was a sharecropper in Plaquemine, Louisiana, in a little small town called Bayagula. So he was 2 generations removed from slavery. So I know I have a root in slavery.
Okay.
Somebody
What if
owned
I have
my
no root in slavery?
great-great-grandfather.
What if I have no root in slavery?
Well, you don't owe nothing. You don't owe anything. Your grandfather, if your grandfather from Canada, he wasn't down here owning slaves.
Okay,
he
I'm
don't
just trying
owe
to.
nothing.
So
If
then
your
people who didn't
grandfather was down here telling
we
niggas
don't
what
pay
to do,
reparations.
he owe money.
Here's what I'm telling you, though. Hold on a second. Here's what I'm telling you. If you're to go through the numbers, sir, do we agree? If I have no connection to slavery whatsoever, that I don't owe.
You still
Me.
You don't.
We
You
agree.
don't.
Okay.
You
So
don't.
do you realize that you could take all the white people in this country, and if you're going to add up everyone where you could actually trace the lineage to slave owners or had any involvement, you would end up with maybe 2 or 3%. 2 or 3% of white people in this country.
There go them numbers. There go them numbers.
Entire
You
salary.
throw out, there go them numbers. There go them
Most of us have
fairly
nothing.
ask this
Somebody did it. Somebody did.
Yeah,
And somebody
Africans
owed.
sold them into slavery.
Somebody owed.
It's still going on right now.
Somebody owed.
I want to fact check, I guess. I want to do a quick fact check of Crowder's claim that only about 2 to 3% of white people today can trace their ancestry back to slave owners. Just a quick fact check. So I asked ChatGPT, I said, what percent of Americans today are descendants of slave owners? And it says, I'm not aware of any definitive peer-reviewed study that establishes a reliable percentage of all Americans today who are descendants of slave owners. The question is hard to answer accurately for several reasons. But here's what we do know and what makes the question difficult. What we do know. A Reuters investigation into genealogies of many U.S. political leaders found that among members of Congress and other officials, a significant minority can trace ancestry to slaveholders. Among 535 members of Congress, that study determined 100 descended from slaveholders, which is approximately 18.7% in that sample of elites. But Congress and political elites are a very selective subset of the population. They are wealthier, more likely to have documented genealogies, and better able to trace ancestry. So that 18.7% figure does not translate to the general population. Many Americans, especially white Americans, do not have family records going back to the antebellum period or lack documentation linking to slave-holding ancestors. Genealogical records from the 18th and 19th centuries are patchy, especially for ordinary people. So that's a fairly high number for members of Congress, close to 20%. So close on almost 1 out of 5 congressmen can trace their ancestry back to slavery or slave holders. And, that's a high percentage. But according to ChatGPT, that percentage is not a good reflection of the overall population. Congress members are fairly elite and have much better records, and so can trace their genealogy, where the average American may not be able to do so, or at least not so easily. All right, so it says, why the question is so hard to answer. Incomplete records. Many people's family histories are not well documented across multiple generations. Slaveholding records, wills, tax records, and property records often have gaps or were lost. Geographic and demographic variation. Slaveholding was concentrated in certain regions and states. Descendants of families from non-slaveholding states or recent immigrants are less likely or very unlikely to have slaveholding ancestors. Number 3, intermarriage and migration. Over many generations, families intermarried, moved, and records became dispersed. Many descendants would also have mixed ancestry or complex genealogical trees. Definition issues. What counts as a descendant of a slave owner? Direct lineal descent, ancestor owning slaves in a particular generation, how far back? These definitional choices will shift estimates. So there are a number of reasons why, it's hard to get a good grasp on what percent of people today in America go back to slave owners and so would be entitled to paying reparations under this reparations scheme that's being discussed by these gentlemen. So things such as, again, incomplete records, geographic and demographic variations, intermarriage and migration, and definition issues are all just things that make it difficult. It goes on to say, a reasoned guess with caveat. Given all of the above, any numerical answer is speculative. But if forced to hazard a guess, it's plausible that a small but non-trivial minority of white Americans, especially those whose families have deep roots in the South or in states that had slavery before the Civil War, could have at least one ancestor who owned enslaved people. So even for people in the South, it says it would be small and non-trivial. But it says for the population as a whole, accounting for immigrants, more recent arrivals, families from non-slaveholding regions, etc., the fraction is likely low, perhaps on the border of single digits to low double digits percent. If you like, I can try to run a more rigorous back-to-envelope genealogical model to estimate a plausible range. And I obliged. So it said the short answer, there's no definitive number, but a careful back of the envelope using what we can measure puts it roughly in the single digits to low teens of all Americans, approximately 5 to 12%, with big caveats below. So ChatGPT says it's about 5 to 12%. where Crowder suggested 2 to 3%. ChatGPT says it's 5 to 12% among the entire American population, and close to 20% among members of Congress. So I think Crowder was being very, very lenient with his number, or he overshot a little bit. And it says, why the 5 to 12% range? Number one, how many 1860 Americans were in slaveholding households? The 1860 census recorded approximately 394,000 named slaveholders among approximately 27.2 million free persons. Counting household members, spouses, children, etc., about approximately 8% of free persons lived in a slave-owning household. How much of today's population descends from people who were already here by 1860? A large slice of Americans descend from post-1865 immigrants who, by definition, had no U.S. slaveholding ancestors. Immigrants today are approximately 14 to 16% of the population, and immigrants plus their U.S.-born children are about 26 to 28% of the population. So call it roughly a quarter of Americans with shallow U.S. roots and near zero chance of U.S. slave owner ancestry. So we would have to take out that 26 to 28% was their, recent arrivals. Number three, putting 1 and 2 together very roughly. It says if approximately 3/4 of Americans have deeper U.S. roots, after they take out that 25%, if approximately 3/4 of Americans have deeper U.S. roots, and within that group, something of the order of approximately 8 to 15% of ancestral lines touch a slave-owning household, 8% is the literal 1860 snapshot. Multiple generations and intermarriage could push that up somewhat, but northern or western lineages push it down. And that's just on the side that ChatGPT mentioned. But the main point it's making is that we would land in a ballpark of approximately 5 to 12% of all Americans today having at least one U.S. slave-owning ancestor. So approximately 5 to 12% of all Americans would have at least one U.S. slave-owning ancestor. And again, that's in contrast to Crowder's 2 to 3%. And I think it's important to also say that, even though 5 to 12% of all Americans have at least one slave-owning ancestor, that doesn't mean that they all benefited from that ancestor, that they received any type of, any type of gifts or what's the word I'm looking for? Just if they were beneficiaries of that money that was made by this slave-owning ancestor. Just because you have an ancestor that owned slaves doesn't mean that whatever money was made from slavery was passed down to you. You could be a far removed ancestor. So that number of 2%, and I guess maybe what Crowder was insinuating, or maybe he was removing from that 5 to 12%, if you remove the ones that had no financial benefits of having a slaveholder ancestor, if you remove them, then you would get to about 2 to 3% of Americans today who have benefited from having a slave-holding ancestor. Because the people who would be responsible for slavery and paying reparations would be the ones who benefited from it. Right? Just having a slave holding ancestor doesn't make you responsible for reparations. You have to have benefited somehow. And so where 5 to 12% had slave owning ancestors, I would go out on a limb and say Crowder is saying 2.3% are the ones that actually benefited. ChatGPT goes on to make an important nuance. It says regional ancestry matters. Among white Americans with deep Southern roots, the chance is notably higher because about 21 to 25% of white Southern households owned slaves in 1860. Ownership was concentrated, but not rare. Genealogical math inflates odds over time. As you go back 6 to 8 generations, you have hundreds of ancestral slots. So the probability of at least one slave-owning ancestor rises for people whose families were long in the South, while it stays near zero for families rooted in non-slave states or who arrived after 1865. Okay, and I think that's pretty straightforward. So the bottom line, it says all Americans, a cautious estimate of approximately 5 to 12% have a U.S. slave-owning ancestor. And again, they may have a slave-owning ancestor, but that doesn't mean they benefited from having that ancestor. And so all 5 to 12% would not necessarily, in my view, be obligated to paying reparations. Among white Americans with deep Southern roots, it says is substantially higher, often 20 to 30%, given the 1860 ownership rates. All right, so that would be the most important. That is one of the important takeaways for me, at least. In making sense of the numbers that were presented, I think 2 to 3% of Americans have slave-holding ancestors and benefited from having those slave-holding ancestors. So I would imagine that his numbers do check out. I give him the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, those numbers absolutely do check out in my view. It would be somewhere in the line of 2 to 3% of Americans that living today that benefit from having a slave-holding ancestor. And if that's true, then that means 2 to 3% of Americans today would be made to pay reparations for 15%. So we have a situation where 2 to 3% of the population would be responsible for paying reparations for 10 to 13% of the population. And how reasonable would that be? How feasible or possible would that even be? How much reparations money would any individual descendant of slave expect to receive? How much would they expect to receive from 2 to 3% of the population who no one knows what type of financial situation they're in? So I think that avenue, that reparations avenue, is just not feasible. And I think that's why that avenue has not been advanced or pursued. The reparations avenue that's more likely pursued is the government paying reparations, because you can get a lot more out of the government in terms of individual payments. Individuals will get a lot more out of the government than they're going to get out of that 2 to 3%. So, I think that's why they'd rather go that route. I'm pretty sure that's why they would prefer to go the government route, because there's so much more to get from that route. Yeah, simply because you have slave owners in your ancestry and you may have benefited from those slave ancestors doesn't necessarily mean that you hold on to those benefits today. Those benefits, or that those benefits are anything meaningful for you to be able to finance reparations payments for 13% of the American population. And those individuals, certain individuals who are descendants of slaves would have to go to those particular descendants of slaveholders that had their own descendants as slaves. And the person that you have to go to may not be in any type of position to pay any significant amount of reparations. And again, that's why they'd rather go the government route, where the government pays reparations, because it's just more likely to get a reasonable or even unreasonable amount of reparations. And I think that's why that avenue is more pursued than the avenue being discussed here by Crowder and these guys in the barbershop. So is this reparations claim sensible, feasible, or anything that's going to bear any meaningful fruit? No, I don't think so. Because again, 2% of the population cannot fund the reparations of 13%. It's just not going to be possible. It's just not. So it's going to come back to the government, and it's going to come back to people that had nothing to do with slavery having to pay reparations. All of those immigrants that are new to the country, they would have to pay reparations. Black or white or Asian, they're all on, you know what I'm saying? They are all responsible. Even the people that are receiving reparations will be paying reparations in this government type system, which is why I think reparations is a very bad idea. There's no avenue that can be taken that reparations is going to be seen as something, as a good idea or a fiscally responsible idea. It just doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make sense.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
Tell the youth them for be strong. You can't tell the youth them for preach wrongs. While you try it on these lands, just remember every man is equal. Yeah. Each one teach one, and our Father God, him are the only done. So make we ease and reason. Smoke trees, span the ends, all the deep meds. Take a look at life and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen and it's no surprise. And I just so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's the government no have no heart, them no care about poor people. Yeah, bigger heads no love people again. Them worse than little of them. Me see friends now reason again. Vex through whistle a blame. What time it hurt me to see how the face deal with the eagle of them. Regular me see it a pain. Regular me see it a pain. Take a look at life and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen and it's no surprise. And I just so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's the government no have no heart, them no care about poor people. Social commentary. Drop the one, your principle, you don't know. The global will come and do it. Some people life every day, it's stress. The high price from JPS, that topic is currently. Jah alone, him a go help you. We need food and we no healthy. We are feel the pain, beg you protect we. In our life we have no envy. Take a look at life and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen and it's no surprise. And I just, so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's a government, no have no heart, them no care about poor people.